As World War II continued, the Japanese Air Force became less and less effective. Pilots and planes lost in the great air battles of the Pacific Campaign could not be replaced. Unlike the United States, Japan had few men who could replace the experienced pilots killed in battle. With victory in Europe approaching, Roosevelt knew that the industrial might of America would eventually overcome the Japanese. He also knew that a new aircraft from Boeing was going to be a great help in winning the war. The B-29 Superfortress. In August of 1943, the Allied leaders met in Quebec, Canada, to plan the defeat of Japan. Roosevelt knew that the distances between islands in the Pacific meant that they had to have a bomber that could project long-range air power. He also knew that he had just the weapon. Rushed out of development, the B-29 could carry a huge payload farther than anything else ever built. He promised the Allies 200 of these superfortresses within 7 months. Inside the Chateau Frontenac at the Joint Chiefs Conference, General Hap Arnold proposed to pierce the inner zone of Japan's homeland with the unbuilt bombers from bases to be erected in China. It was a bold plan. At the time of the Quebec Conference, there were only 11 superforts in existence. It was a race with time. Putting these planes together was no small task. In each plane, there were 55,000 numbered parts, thousands of miles of wiring, 1 million rivets. From its transparent nose to its tail, this was a complicated machine. Nevertheless, the Air Force ordered the assemblies like pieces for a giant jigsaw puzzle. By December, only 4 months after the President's promise, 35 superfortresses had come off the assembly line. Then, every hour of every day, identical miracles of modern machinery were brought together. Workers witnessed an inspiring sight, a welding of vision and reality. Building the superfortress was the climax of one of the great industrial feats in the history of modern warfare. Thus, the 99-foot-long aerial giant, spreading 141-foot wings, was born. By the end of January, 142 superforts were accepted. 3/4 of America's promise, and our pipelines were full. Here were 65 tons of fighting fury, the biggest, fastest, and most powerful bomber in the world.
It was a very fine aircraft. It exemplified the latest state-of-the-art in long-range, high-altitude bomber development. It had a pressurized cabin, which was a first. It had very refined aerodynamic design. To give you an example of this, the drag of the B-29 was cut in half when you raised the landing gear. Just the fact of raising the landing gear cut the aircraft's drag in half, which I think is a tribute to how smoothly and how well refined that aircraft was. It had exceptional range characteristics, in part because of this very fine, refined design that it had. It had some tremendous technological attributes for its time. It was what we might call the first true systems airplane. For example, the turrets were not operated by gunners sitting under a bubble, moving with the turret, tracking the guns against their foe, things of this sort. They were remotely sighted. The turrets were controlled remotely from centralized fire control stations. Radar was incorporated into the aircraft's operations as a navigation aid and as a bombing aid. There was a lot of attention went into this airplane in terms of developing it as what we might term a systems airplane. And indeed, it's ironic that after the Second World War, the B-29 became the basis for virtually all subsequent Soviet long-range aircraft as well. The Soviets were recipients of several B-29s that force landed in Russia during the Second World War, and they copied these directly as the Tupolev Tu-4, which was given the NATO codename Bull, and then it in turn inspired a whole series of derivatives, and indeed the B-29's design influence could be seen in subsequent Soviet turbojet bombers as well.
The B-29 Superfortress had a 141-foot wingspan with a total length of just over 99 feet. Its height was 27 feet 9 inches. It was powered by 4 R-3350 engines, and it had a maximum speed of 357 miles per hour. It weighed 74,500 pounds empty and 135,000 pounds loaded for battle. With a ceiling of 23,900 feet and a range of 5,400 miles, it put the final nails in Japan's coffin. This heavy bomber was able to carry a payload that other bombers could only dream about. Getting the B-29s built was only half of the battle. There had to be places in the Orient where they could land and take off. Air bases in China were the only solution. Armies of laborers were put to work building a network of air bases across China. Under the direction of 26 American officers and enlisted men, and at a cost of $150 million, 1,000-man gangs, following their own flagmen, rolled out 4 great air bases. April 24th became a day for the 20th Bomber Command to remember. General Saunders and Colonel Jake Harmon led the B-29 parade into Chongqing. Nearly all the immense airfields were ready for business. They had been built in only 3 months. Here was the Superfortress. It had hopped the Atlantic, Africa, and India. It flew from Kansas to China in a week. It didn't seem possible, but only a year and a half after the first experimental B-29 was flown, a fleet of American aerial dreadnoughts was arriving in China. Next stop, Japan. Within 10 days, the Allied Asiatic strength was 130 Superforts. Directed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff because of their long range and power, they were the first units of the 20th Air Force. Roosevelt was keeping his promise. With more Superforts on the way, the runway builders never stopped. In China, skilled hands were pounding out a path to victory. Meanwhile, in Japan, 1,500 miles to the east, other hands had forged a modern war machine. Geared for war since 1928, their production rolled on. Like the Germans, they believed their empire invulnerable. Since Pearl Harbor, steel capacity had doubled. 1/3 was hammered into ships, ships to exploit conquered lands, ships to support far-flung military forces. While suffering from shipping sunk by the Allies, Japan maintained the world's 3rd largest merchant fleet with continued launchings. Their Asian empire of Japan, Korea, and Manchuria, connected by an efficient merchant marine, formed an industrial behemoth 3 times larger than Germany. Their armed forces had expanded to 5 million soldiers, nearly 4 times their strength at the time of Pearl Harbor. By June, the Allied bases in China were working around the clock. The Joint Chiefs of Staff had ordered an attack on the Japanese. The Allied target was Yowata, Japan's heavily guarded industrial center, which made 1/5 of all Japanese steel. General Wolfe was winning the big gamble. His idea to train the crews while they tested the experimental B-29 was putting both men and planes in combat 6 months sooner. They were doing the impossible. General Stratemeyer, the theater air commander, and General Wolfe watched 68 superfortresses become airborne. Almost the entire force ordered for this historic mission. Landfall. Japan. The enemy was waiting. Up came heavy, bursting flak. Nearly 5 miles below lay the sprawling mills that armed the Japanese. Jimmy Doolittle had said that the Allies would be back, and the Allies were. 2.5 years after Pearl Harbor, Allied superfortresses struck Japan. Land-based planes dropped bombs through clouds on Yawata. Damage was done to the Kokurta arsenal. Punishment to the steel industry was not extensive, but the B-29 blitz was underway. Soon, full-scale operations against Japan were underway on a daily basis. 1,500 miles to targets, and 1,500 miles back. From bases at Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The 21st Bomber Command was in charge, and they were concentrating their massive air power on the industrial and military complexes within Japan. This was the beginning of the end of the war against Tokyo. Back in Guam, after 6 months of reoccupation, there were few signs of war along these quiet summer shores. The liberated Chamorros were back in their native villages, American citizens again, smiling and friendly, unaware that a miracle had happened around them. A miracle that moved mountains of material, equipment, and supplies across the Pacific, that changed their dirt roads into broad highways, that manicured their jungles into acres of black-topped airfields. By midsummer, 21st Bomber Command was in business. Big business. Under General LeMay's direction, the long arm of Bomber Command began punching the enemy with appalling power. From Guam, Tinian, and Saipan, 600 plane missions increased the bombing weight 100% in 2 months. Behind this expanding power was planning. The LeMay plan began on the ground with maintenance. At the center of the plan was the B-29. Assembly line technique cut engine change time from 3 days to less than half a day. In shops and hard stands, ground crews worked day and night during the blitz weeks to keep more B-29s on the line. By July, LeMay's Bomber Command was an efficient, well-oiled, well-drilled machine of destruction. Here's a vital cog of that machine: 11 men and a bomber. While they wind up for action, let's find out where they're going and some of the things they're going to do, and why, and with what. How do they set up the longest, toughest bomber mission in history? It began about 12 hours ago in the war room at Guam, with General LeMay and his staff receiving a report on tomorrow's weather in Japan. Tomorrow's forecast is typical: 80% clouds above 10,000 feet. In the east, Tokyo area will be 60% cloudy at 22,000, 30% at 14,000 feet, closing up solid after 11 a.m. Osaka and everything west is reported completely socked in. How will the general solve that one? His B-29s are up against a blank wall, except for a possible opening around Tokyo. The old man considers every vital factor and makes his decision. 4 wings will strike Tokyo at 10 o'clock. They'll go in under that weather and bomb at 12,000. Now it's a question of target selection. First priority in the Tokyo area is number 573. Intelligence informs the general that 573 is already 3/4 destroyed. At the moment, number 574, still untouched, would seem more important. Operations checks the tactical plan for 574. General LeMay orders the required changes, okays the target, and commits all executive details to his staff. Operations, with his deputy chief of staff and project officer, goes to work setting up the changes. In that plans folder is a mountain of preparation by special sections of intelligence and operations. 1,000 hours of research, collated facts, and figures have been distilled into Tactical Plan 574. Aircraft will assemble as brief with 3 groups of P-51s for escort. Smoke markers at 1-minute intervals will be dropped by lead planes to expedite departure from assembly point. 1 squadron each wing will carry M47 incendiary clusters. Balance of squadrons 500 and 1,000-pound GP bombs fused a quarter second, nose and tail. Altitude of attack, 12,000 feet. Planes of 314th Wing will carry capacity fuel loads of approximately 7,300 gallons per plane. Calibrated airspeed of 210 miles per hour will be flown by all aircraft on bombing run. Radar landfall 3450 north and 140 east will be the same for all planes to afford a good land-water contrast checkpoint. The Navy is requested to furnish the following facilities for air-sea rescue purposes: 3 surface vessels to proceed to positions X, 4 submarines assigned to lifeguard duties at positions Y, 2 Dumbos to orbit at station Z. 4 B-29s will orbit as Super Dumbos at the following positions. Each section of the plan is double-checked. To supervise certain aspects of planning, Lieutenant Colonel Catton, a former lead crew pilot, was recently brought over to staff as project officer. This officer's extensive combat experience now helps to iron out operational kinks. He will accompany this mission to observe new smoke signals at assembly point. A field order is now dispatched to the wings. Takeoff time is flashed to the controller, who coordinates the vast network of communications gathered here at the heart and nerve center of command. Here in the control room, status panels of the mission board are maintained to show at a glance the countless, up-to-the-minute details of all daily operations. Prior to takeoff, each mission is set up on the board to afford a visual progress of the flight, from takeoff to target and return. Colored yarns, 1 for each wing, are laid out to indicate the flight lines, which pass close to Iwo Jima, the halfway point, and proceed as specified in the field order to the proper target. Other symbols are used to mark air-sea rescue positions. A timetable of statistics for each wing, as planned and flown, is recorded from hourly reports on the status panel, beginning with takeoff time. To veteran crews, it's just another day's work. One more 1,500-mile haul up and down the ruddy Pacific. 15 hours, 7,000 gallons, 4 engines, 11 guys. A water jump across 20 degrees of the globe, a continent of ocean. Destination, Tokyo. It's like taking off in Mexico for targets in Canada. The 314th is airborne. 145 planes, 1 minute apart, 67 tons each. Those B-29 takeoffs are a tough sweat. That first long moment is the worst. Some swear it takes not just skill, but luck to reach the sky. 100 miles north, 2 more B-29 wings prepare for takeoff. 134 aircraft from the 58th Wing, 100 more from the 313th Wing. At Saipan, a few minutes later, the veteran 73rd Wing lines up for takeoff. 153 more bombers are added to the mission's striking force. The last B-29 is airborne at 1540. The tower at Saipan relays this information to the controller back at Guam. First and last takeoff times of each wing are recorded here and go to make up the first of a series of tabulated mission reports. Copies of these reports are dispatched to headquarters, Washington, and posted on the control room report board. During that first hour, the B-29s have settled down for the big ride, saving precious gas, cruising 1,000 feet off the water. Ability, experience, confidence ride in each plane. A plan of action for 11 men, trained and tested to function as one. The navigator sets the course, logging island checkpoints as they climb past the northern Marianas, Vega, Asuncions, Mor, the Pajoys. After about 4 hours of flight, the bombers pass close to Iwo Jima, the hot rock, a black, gritty pork chop halfway to Hung Chu, 8 square miles, bought and paid for by the Marines. The Allies made some quick changes, cutting away that sulfurous volcanic crust and rolling Iwo's surface into one enormous flat top. 3 big airstrips now launch the P-51s for bomber escort over Japan. General Moore and his staff of the 7th Fighter Command run the show and direct all air-sea rescue operations in close collaboration with Bomber Command. A last-minute briefing check just to make sure today's fighter escort knows all air-sea rescue positions. Out on the line, General Moore's P-51s are warming up for the longest fighter flight on record. 7 hours on one engine, extra belly tanks, extra nerve and stamina in the cockpit. About the time the bomber wings are passing Iwo Jima, the Mustangs are taking off, scheduled to join them 3.5 hours later off the shores of Japan. After a rendezvous at Kita, the P-51s head for assembly point, led by B-29s designated as navigator ships. Farther west, the bomber wings grind ahead on the last lap to the Empire. Reports to the controller back at Guam give their flight position, which is kept up to the hour on the mission board. Still at low altitude, the B-29s are approaching the bad weather belt, where unreported storms and cold fronts appear suddenly across the bomber course.
To crew, we're going to start our climb. Check oxygen equipment. Tell Buck he'd better get out to his doghouse.
As they begin their slow climb to altitude, the crews prepare for the vital business ahead. And from now on, until they come off target and head home, it's all business. The central fire system is warmed up. Superhuman brain power at the flick of a switch. Each gunner flexes his sights and tries the coordinated fire controls with a few short bursts to clear the guns. After pushing up to altitude, the bombers arrive close to assembly point. Air in the pressurized cabin is comparable to 8,000 feet, but oxygen masks are adjusted and ready for instant use. From the southeast, the fighter escort appears with its navigator ships, which now turn off to wait for the fighters' return at rally point. The Mustangs climb in formation to take positions above the boxes of B-29s. Lead bombers begin to circle, dropping new smoke markers for assembly. The project officer observes this part of the tactical plan in action. From various zone positions, the groups separate and form on their lead ships in 9 or 11 plane waves, which head for initial point. The great parade is on. Landfall is picked up, along with the first flak burst. Fujiyama, the familiar white beacon, marks the turn for initial point. Flak becomes heavier and more accurate. And now, the first enemy snipers appear, diving head-on into the formations. Some are suicide fighters trying to ram our bombers. Other Japanese fighters drop phosphorus bombs, set to explode in front of the oncoming B-29. The P-51s go on after them and know they're tangling with experts. The P-51's job is to protect the B-29s. But some of those enemy fighters filter through and meet the blast of bomber guns. A tail gunner pleads with a Japanese fighter to come in a little closer. From the turn at initial point, the tight bomber waves move steadily on and get ready for business. Flak and fighters fall off. But those clouds are beginning to close in, and it looks worse ahead. Then, just east of Hachioshi, the Tokyo area breaks clear. The bombardiers began to draw a bead on 574. The planes sit tight for the bombing run. 2 Japanese aircraft plants and an airbase, 12,000 feet below, are about to receive 4,000 tons of destruction. The first waves of B-29s have already found their objective. Succeeding bomber groups add their devastation to the smoking targets. Tactical Plan 574 is now an accomplished fact. The bombers turn and go downwind across the burnt acres of Tokyo. Close-up cameras show the scars of those deadly fire strikes last March. 51 square miles of LeMay treatment. Across the bay, a tailwind speeds them south down the Chiba Peninsula. This is fighter country. With the first call on the intercom, the Mustangs peel off and go to work again. With the big bombers homeward bound, the P-51s drop down for strafing runs, concentrating on definite objectives from here to the enemy coast. Skimming along at maximum speed, the fighters pair off and go to work cutting vital Japanese lifelines, blasting away at communications, radio installations, power lines, swooping down on enemy transportation, railroads, marshalling yards, small suburban factories, and airfields. Then on to shipping targets. Freighters, trawlers, coastal craft or destroyer, it's the same enemy. After strafing, the fighters climb back to rally point and the waiting B-29 Navigator planes. With the first sight of Iwo, fuel gauges are down close to empty, but fighter spirits begin to rise. They wind up and finish with a kick, coming back at whiplash speed and zoom into their victory rolls once over for each Japanese ship or plane destroyed. After the last fighter groups are in, all hands sweat in those first limping B-29s. That runway is a beautiful sight as they let down with engines out, low on gas, or beat up by flak and fighters. In 3 months, hundreds of crippled or gas-shy B-29s havened at Iwo. You can understand why the flyboys blessed those Marines and even named their planes after them. The lucky ones have fueled and depart for home bases in an hour, but Iwo still has its hazards. Weather can turn this station into a hopeless pea soup. Fog and quick overcast often black out the airstrip during these crucial periods. That means orders to bail out, or with luck, a B-29 might drop in for a copybook ditching. From here, you can see how the cloud cover up there smothers the runway and realize what one pilot went through. Sometimes a battle-scarred bomber staggers back to Iwo, only to flatten out at the last heartbreaking second. By some miracle, the whole crew got away from their stations to safety before 2,000 gallons of flaming gas enveloped them. Fighters risked their lives to save the ship. This, too, took courage beyond the line of duty. Far to the south, most of the wings are nearing their bases. Exhausted crews wait out the last endless hour when time seems to stop. Their position is radioed in, and the controller gets word of the approaching flight. At last, the familiar Marianas appear on the horizon. Bombers fly across Guam and turn into the landing pattern. 15 hours ago, they left the other end of that runway. But some of those B-29 crews won't be able to talk it over today. 11 men and a bomber that didn't quite make it. The rescue squads tear away the hot metal. Somehow, in that burning wreckage, a man has lived to feel those eager, gallant hands. 1 life saved and 10 lost. That's part of today's toll. And there were many other days and nights that took their toll of young American lives in the service of relentless, expanding air power. By the end of July, the B-29s had all but obliterated the enemy's ability to make war. 1,000-plane missions were going to hit Japan with twice the monthly tonnage that ever fell on Germany. The question was, how much longer would a beaten Japan hold out? A global bomber and a global air force were in operation. The beginning of the end of the Japanese Empire was underscored in exploding bombs that reminded the Japanese of Pearl Harbor. The growing, systematic wave of destruction had started. From China, and later from Saipan, the Allies were forging a huge nutcracker to crush the enemy. General Arnold's determined order, make them the biggest, make them the heaviest, and fly them the farthest, was carried out. He warned the enemy, no part of the Japanese Empire is out of our range. No war factory too remote to feel our bombs. The battle for Japan is now underway with full speed ahead. In August, the Allies made a test that never was applied to Germany. While great land, sea, and air forces gathered for their last invasion, our B-29s dropped 2 atomic bombs, which hastened the surrender of Japan and saved untold thousands of American lives. So the mission of the Allied air forces, which began nearly 4 years before, was accomplished. And it was the B-29 that made it all possible. After the war, the Japanese military acknowledged that the Superfortress was the single most important weapon that defeated them. While it is true that war is hell, it is also true that brave men must fight against tyranny. And in that fight, as these magnificent warbirds have shown, he who controls the air wins the battle.